Welcome to this explainer. Today we're doing something a little different. We're going to literally dissect the rise, the slow rot, and the totally inevitable fall of history's greatest empires. We're going to uncover those recurring patterns of societal ruin that have, honestly, plagued human civilization for centuries. Throughout history, powerful nations have risen to just incredible heights, controlling vast lands, completely shaping the world. But as we'll see today, no matter how absolutely invincible they seemed at the time, they all eventually faced the exact same existential threats.
So, why do great nations die? Let's dive into this massive question. Because whether we're talking about the sprawling Roman Empire connecting entire continents or the nuclear-armed Soviet Union, history shows us one really painful, undeniable truth. No nation lasts forever. Some just kind of fade away slowly over centuries, completely drained of their vitality, while others, they fall incredibly suddenly through war, economic disaster, or just sheer internal chaos. So what actually causes a seemingly unstoppable superpower to flatline?
To make sense of thousands of years of complex history, we've structured our autopsy report into 5 distinct phases: the illusion of invincibility, the silent killers, fatal tipping points, the modern mirror, and finally, how great nations survive.
All right, let's jump right into Phase 1, the illusion of invincibility, the sheer arrogance of eternal empires.
You see, this illusion is a super dangerous psychological pattern, and it repeats over and over again throughout human history. It's this blind belief that a powerful nation is completely invincible, like it's totally beyond failure. Take the Western Roman Empire. For centuries, the perception was that Rome was just unstoppable. I mean, citizens saw this ever-expanding territory across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. They saw feared armies, incredible infrastructure, and a system they truly believed was eternal. But the reality underneath? It was entirely different. It was actually an incredibly fragile society being absolutely crushed by heavy taxes. You had corrupt politicians fighting for their own power instead of serving the people, and economic inequality was skyrocketing. The rich were hoarding wealth while the poor suffered. Even the military was getting weak, relying on soldiers who basically just fought for a paycheck rather than any real loyalty to Rome.
And when you look at the timeline of Rome's fall, it completely proves that collapse is almost always a slow, then sudden process. You have centuries of absolute dominance, right? But that slowly gives way to the silent rot of economic inequality and a weakened military. Then, boom, outside threats arrive, in this case Germanic tribes and barbarian groups attacking the borders. Because the leaders were so focused on temporary fixes instead of, actually solving the deep internal problems, it all culminated in a sudden, shocking event: the complete removal of the last Roman emperor in 476 CE.
Which brings us to Phase 2, the silent killers, the quiet rot from within.
These are the internal diseases that quietly, almost invisibly, weaken a nation long before the final blow is ever struck. Historically, we see 3 primary silent killers. First up, severe economic crises. Think of the Great Depression, where millions lost jobs, businesses completely collapsed, and that resulting fear and anger created massive political instability. Second, we have political corruption, which, as an example, sparked the French Revolution. In France, extreme inequality meant ordinary folks suffered from hunger and poverty while the ruling elites lived in absolute luxury. Eventually, that public frustration just exploded into violent revolution and total political chaos. And third, internal division. The American Civil War is a perfect example of this. When people stop seeing each other as citizens of one shared country and instead become deeply divided by politics, race, or ideology, national unity just evaporates. Millions suffered and hundreds of thousands died in a conflict that really showed how internal division can push even the most powerful country right to the edge of total destruction.
So the absolutely crucial point here is this: corruption acts quite literally like a poison in the system. Now, at first, it might just seem like small instances of bribery or maybe some misuse of public money. But over time, it completely destroys institutions from within. When leaders stop listening to ordinary people and focus only on protecting their own power and wealth, well, citizens lose faith. They lose faith in their laws, their elections, and their leadership. The nation completely loses its shared hope for the future. And honestly, once that hope disappears, a full collapse becomes incredibly likely.
We actually see these internal killers perfectly demonstrated in the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Back in the 20th century, this was a massive global superpower with a huge military and nuclear weapons. People genuinely thought it would survive forever. But beneath the surface, the government heavily restricted freedom of speech, which completely crushed innovation and competition. The economy became horribly inefficient, leaving citizens facing extreme shortages of food and basic goods. Add to that a massively expensive arms race with the United States that basically bankrupted the whole system, and public frustration finally boiled over. Different republics demanded independence, leading to a shockingly fast official collapse in 1991. I mean, it completely defied what most global experts predicted at the time.
And that sets the stage for Phase 3, fatal tipping points, the external shocks.
So once a nation is thoroughly weakened by those silent killers we just talked about, it really only takes one major external pressure, one shock, to push it permanently over the edge. Look at the incredibly dangerous concept of military overexpansion. At its peak, the British Empire controlled a staggering 25% of the globe, a quarter of the entire world. But maintaining such a sprawling empire required enormous, non-stop resources. Powerful nations often fall into this trap, right? They start believing they can fight too many wars or dominate the entire world indefinitely. For Britain, 2 world wars critically weakened them, both economically and militarily. The cost simply became impossible to sustain, colonies started demanding independence, and their global dominance just faded away.
But military overreach isn't the only external shock out there. Nations can also tip into ruin simply by failing to embrace technological innovation. Think about the Industrial Revolution. Countries that failed to adapt to factories and modern transportation struggled to compete. They quickly became outdated and super vulnerable. On top of that, environmental collapse has literally wiped out entire civilizations. Historians point to severe droughts, crop failures, and major resource shortages as the tipping point that crippled the ancient Maya civilization. When food becomes scarce, social stability vanishes almost immediately. It's wild how fast it happens.
Which brings us to a really fascinating and maybe slightly scary Phase 4, the modern mirror, echoes in the present day.
This is perhaps the most urgent part of our explainer today, because remember, to the ordinary people living in Rome or the Soviet Union, the decline often felt completely invisible right up until the very end. They just went about their daily lives exactly like we do. Yet modern nations today are currently facing the exact same historical pressures that destroyed those empires of the past. Think about it. We're dealing with extreme political polarization, widening economic inequality, these new and honestly terrifying frontiers of misinformation and cyber warfare, not to mention looming climate disasters and global resource tensions. Many analysts are warning that if our leaders fail to address these pressures wisely, the exact same slow rot that took down history's giants could literally be happening to us right now, right under our noses.
But it's not all doom and gloom. Let's look at Phase 5, how great nations survive, the antidote to collapse.
You see, history isn't just some graveyard of failed states. It actually provides a really powerful, actionable survival guide for nations willing to adapt and evolve. Our analysis of the historical data shows that there is an antidote to collapse, and it requires 3 vital steps. First up, we absolutely must proactively reform corrupt systems before they poison our institutions completely. Second, we have to relentlessly invest in our education and technological innovation so we don't get left in the dust. And third, and this is perhaps the most important one, we must intelligently protect our shared national unity. A nation's survival relies so heavily on strong leadership, public trust, and true national cooperation. A country dies when it stops listening to its citizens and allows internal weakness to overpower external strength.
Because ultimately, the survival of any great nation depends on its people and its leaders facing this final, super provocative question. Will we learn from history, or will we arrogantly repeat it? History isn't just a story about the past. It's a blaring warning alarm for our future. Every empire, every kingdom, and every superpower is eventually tested by the silent killers we've outlined today. The choice of what we do next? Well, that is entirely up to us. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope it leaves you looking at our modern world with a sharper, much more historically